it's wonderful to be with you all this morning or afternoon, wherever we're at now. This is such a great panel, and I loved the video that was just shown because in my work around the world, I see this firsthand every day. So I'm thrilled to have two experts with us who are going to share what they've been seeing. And I know that we had one more on the panel. Unfortunately, Dritan Nesho was unable to make it because of COVID, but he sends us his best, and Aaron is going to do his best to fill in.
He sent me some notes.
Great data.
I'll do my best.
Don't worry, we'll make sure you get it all. But let me just first say that today we are talking about media and international religious freedom and really educating the public about what's happening and making sure that the people who are suffering on the ground have a voice that's being heard, which is so critical, not just for those that are suffering, but for religious expression as well, which is so critical to this conversation. So we're going to explore all of these topics from what's happening in the media to what's happening on the ground, and I'm just very grateful. So let me introduce our two panelists today. So first, right next to me is Aaron Sherinian, and Aaron is the CEO of the Radiant Foundation, and as the head of global reach for the Desert Management Corporation, which many of you may know. His career has included assignments at the crossroads of issues related to public relations, faith and human rights, and communications. He's a former diplomat with the US government and has also run communications for global organizations from the United Nations Foundation to the Aga Khan Development Network, which is wonderful. I know that they've been very supportive of religious freedom work. He's also worked with many Fortune 500 corporations on some of their biggest transformation projects, and believes that a healthy perspective on faith issues is really key to helping organizations, large and small, achieve their goals in a way that's inclusive, respectful, and modern. So that's critical. He splits his time between DC and Salt Lake City, Utah. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We're grateful that you're here. And then next to Aaron is Marco Respinti. And Marco is an Italian professional journalist and a member of the International Federation of Journalists, an essayist, translator, lecturer. He's contributed to several journals and magazines, both in print and online, and most importantly, he's going to share the one that we're going to hear about today, Bitter Winter, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about all of the work that you've done to bring together thousands of voices who hadn't been heard before, which is really phenomenal in this space. So he's a member of the Advisory Council of the European Federation for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and the Universal Peace Federation bestowed on him, among many others, the title of Ambassador for Peace. So thank you for your great work. And there's many more things I could say about both of you, but let me just begin with, in the space of the media, obviously faith and religion and religious freedom is something that many of us here feel has been disadvantaged or hasn't been covered enough. And we often wonder, can our voices be heard? So let me just start with an opener, and I'll start with you, Aaron, and then I'll go to you, Marco, is religion and faith and religious expression being blocked? And if so, how? And if not, maybe in your experience, how are we overcoming that? Thank you.
I'll get started. Well,
great.
I'd like to echo a little bit about what we heard Ambassador Power say just a few minutes ago, right here from the stage, where she said in the call to action that we had to help bring the human consequences and the human connections back home. Mm-hmm. And she was talking, I think, about the diplomatic community in the United States of America, but I think back home is all of us. Mm-hmm. So how do we solve a problem and how do we deal with the consequences, I think is starting with us. Mm-hmm. These issues are real, they're delicate, they're fragile. I don't want to in any way minimize any of the real dangers that people face every day when they talk about these issues. But at the same time, we as a community who care about them, the people who are here, the people that you represent, we need to remember that it's not a niche issue. Yeah. I think sometimes when we approach the media, when we approach those who make culture, if you will, the people who buy their gigabytes by the barrel, right? It used to be you bought ink by the barrel. You know, they're here, they're part of this conversation. When we approach them, we approach these issues as if they're niche. 83% of the world's population affiliates with a faith. So that's not a niche issue, it's a human issue. Mm-hmm. And so I think in some ways, not to do it in a way that's rambunctious or boastful or prideful, but to just call it out as both a human imperative, mm-hmm. and by the way, if the media is listening to it, it's a market opportunity. Yeah. Because 83% of the people around here are seeing this as a fascinating story. So not only is it human, but it's also what 83% of the world is doing. So I think we, as those people who care about the issue, you, people who advocate for it, we should start with that fact. Maybe certain statistics say that fewer people show up in the pews, but we happen to know that people around the world are showing up in prayer and in institutions and in communities that care about these issues.
And don't let them ignore it, essentially.
That is
But
our
taking
job.
Of
Exactly.
strength with them and posturing it differently.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you because I'm going to ask you a follow-up on that. Marco.
Yeah, thank you, Tina, for this very important question. Religious persecution is very widespread. But I think many media people, especially journalists, are not prepared enough to face the real problem. You just said it. Most of the people in the world are religious, are affiliated with one group or another, one religion or another. Many journalists don't understand what the problem with religion is. They may say, you know, yeah, okay, it's another group, another obscure group. It's not that. It's the right of people to know and follow the truth, whatever you call it. So it's a basic question. It's also a political question because your right, your liberty to practice your religion means you need to live it publicly. So it goes social, it goes political. So it's a huge problem. And many of my colleagues, not all of them, there are wonderful exceptions, many of my colleagues are not mentally, culturally prepared to face this huge problem. So they use the wrong words, the wrong approach. They don't get to the core question. It goes back to education. It goes back to, as I said, it's a strong word, but it's going back to the core question of truth. Truth exists or not, you may choose, but you need to face it. Many journalists are not willing to do that. So journalists from being an ally of persecuted people can become an instrument, an indirect instrument of some sort of persecution. And this is too bad. We need to cope with that.
So I think that we're talking about two kind of lanes here. One is the education of the media professionals that needs to take place so that they actually cover these ways in a way that's more relevant to the fact that this is part of the human story, that it's of human relevance, and that they understand how to articulate it. And then the second is how do we educate the public more through the media of what religious freedom really is and what's happening so that the public is more aware of that and of the religious dimension of the world and what's happening in it. So let's start with the lane of the media. How do you engage in the media? What is the data showing as far as what they're doing and what they're not doing and how we can engage them better on this topic?
So let me tell you a story. I used to work for in an organization whose board member, a prominent, amazing Indian executive who would always bring us in and he would say, I'll never forget, he would say, "In God we trust, but you all bring me some numbers." And I love that point because I think we talk about this in generalities. We have numbers. And there are numbers here that discuss this issue. So just talking about the journalists themselves, instead of talking about the media, I'm lucky to be sitting with a respected member of the media, people who do this for a living, but we talked with the journalists. And let me tell you what they told us. A majority of journalists said they're willing to engage, but they do feel reprisal is a problem. They're scared of getting it wrong. They're not scared of taking it up, but there's this idea about getting it wrong. The public has said, and the media has said, a majority of people have said, that they want to see more diverse spokespeople when they talk to a religious community or institution. It's great that you have the spokesperson, but they need access to the people. If we're talking about religious freedom issues, maybe that's more evident who we're talking about.
They want to hear the people on the ground.
And that's hard because you've got to protect in certain cases, and there are privacy issues in some cases that you work on, security issues. But either way, how can we as communicators on either side of this ensure that there are those human voices? And then the other piece that's important, I think, is that we need to acknowledge that if you do a mapping of all of the landscape of media about religion or faith today, 63% of it would be classified as negative, sensationalist, or divisive. Now, a media person will say, well, that's what sells. The reality is, however, we need to challenge ourselves as storytellers, and the media must challenge itself, and they're ready to, for the idea that does nuanced always need to be negative? No. Does complex always need to be controversial? Not always. So let's tell the stories in all their format so that when we have a moment where we're talking about something that is delicate, nuanced, urgent, that they're able to actually have more voices, more spokespeople, and they're able to do it. A final stat that I'll leave you with is that there are a majority of people, again, we're talking over the half of people polled in a recent poll done by Harris X, and I've got it here since Triton Nisho couldn't be here. But more than half the people polled said they would favor a media outlet if it had more religion or faith-based content in it. That goes counter to what some people think.
That's a big data
That's a big data point. Editors, I hope you're listening.
Yeah.
Contributing desks, I hope you're listening. Advertisers, I hope you're listening. People think, oh, no one reads about religion anymore. That is just not the case. People will benefit from it, and people will favor that. Now, what does favoring mean? I think it means opening it, clicking onto it on my news feed, saving it, allowing for push notifications, or maybe subscribing as a premium subscriber. So I don't want to minimize the fact that this shouldn't be seen as just a commercial opportunity. But we've allowed for taboos to put us out of good storytelling. And it has to happen all the time, not just in moments of crisis.
Well, I think you make a really important point, that it's important for a lot of people here, especially if you're an advocate and you're working with communities on the ground. The storytelling aspect of what we do is crucial for people to understand and to really come into that story and be a part of it and want to do something to respond. And with the media, if you can get that story, especially as firsthand as possible, they're going to want to tell it. And there's so many amazing stories to tell, and I know that everyone here at the table has one that they could share. So I think it would be amazing to see the floodgates open this week with everybody sending stories, sending inspiration, and telling people this is what's happening on the ground. These are the voices that need to be heard, whether it's from Cuba or China or Venezuela, wherever it's from. Let those stories get out. It's so important. And posting them through your websites is part of it, and to get it to the journalists. But let's go to Marco. How do people on the ground get the information to you? How do you get the information of what's happening so that you can tell those stories? How does that work? And tell us a little bit about Bitter Winter and what you're doing.
Yes, of course. I cannot tell you all the secrets that we use to get stories and first-hand information, but let me say that personal relationship is crucial. We started Bitter Winter magazine online in May 2018, and that was a long story, but to cut it short, it's an original combination between professional journalists, human rights activists, and some religious scholars on religions. It's a kind of original combination because it brings different angles together, but everything started with personal relationship with people escaping from persecution. We started with focusing on China, and we did exclusively China for 2 years. Then we enlarged the scope. And when we started doing religious persecution in China, we started knowing people all over the world, but basically in Asia and in America, who escaped direct persecution. It was a long relationship. They had to trust us as a reliable people who were willing to speak the truth. Out of that, we got in touch with people on the ground working undercover. That was a major feature for Bitter Winter because we could get original information, videos, pictures that no one else at that time used to publish, and we were able to publish them. And that has some cost, because some of these people who connected us with people on the ground were arrested. And of many of them, we know nothing. That is the price they pay, and I want our readers and all the people in this room to keep this in mind. We owe to the freedom of those people our job, our way of, our possibility to speak the truth, to use that word again. So, to answer directly, personal relationship, trust, And that is, when you speak with religious people, that is basically based on in a shared idea of, a supreme being, God, whatever you call it, and then it goes to a professional side. When they trust us, they give us information, and through them, we can inform the world. Many journalists, not only Peter Winter, do this, but when I say many, I also say not enough yet.
Yeah. Let's talk about a specific country. So let's talk a little bit more about China. And we've talked a lot about, in the past here, what was happening to the Uyghur community. And I'm sure it's been highlighted this week as well. But when there's such horrific things happening to a particular community, like the Uyghurs in China, and you could refer to this in many different countries, it's the same situation. How do those people get that information to you, and what have you found is happening there that is so critical to breaking this media impasse to make them tell the story?
Well, we found out that the Uyghur problem is a huge problem, probably amounting to a genocide, cultural genocide, but we also find out that it is not the only case, unfortunately, in China. Mongolian people are suffering the same things. Their language is forbidden, their religion is forbidden, their cultural identity is forbidden. Tibetans are suffering the same thing. Some lesser known groups, but composed by thousands, sometimes millions of people, have suffered the same problem, like the Church of the Almighty God, Falun Gong. I can mention also Christians who have been through a number of direct and indirect persecution. So first of all, what we found is that the Uyghur situation is staggering, is horrible, but unfortunately, it's not the only one. Second thing is that we discovered that, and this is not a novelty, but the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has a whole propaganda machine smuggling out of the country fake news that, again, many journalists just repeat with no criticism. And we find out that part of this job of the CCP in spreading fake news was trying to convince the West, especially, that nothing was going on in China, in the Uyghurs' territories. And we were able, in the fall of 2018, to publish online the first video from inside one of the detention camps in Xinjiang, or East Turkestan, as they call it. And at that point, the CCP changed its narrative. It could not say they don't exist, because we had a video and other people had pictures and documentation. So they changed the narrative and say that they are not prisons, they are training school. This is a very important point. We can challenge and change the narrative of the persecutors if we speak the truth. It's still a lie, what they say, but it's a changed lie. And if we keep on, we may nail them to the truth and try to not only change the narrative, but completely cancel this fake news.
Aaron, thank you. Aaron, how important is it for a group like Bitter Winter have these networks and this information to the work of the media to make sure that these stories are being heard?
Well, I can't speak to any media organization working on a particular issue in a particular place, etc. I won't pretend to. That's not what I'm here to do, nor will I. But I do know that journalists everywhere are keen to talk about diversity. Mm-hmm. And people everywhere are keen to talk about diversity and inclusion. It's not a trend, it's human, it's part of what's happening right now. And diversity and inclusion is something that people say faith has to be a part of. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm going to do my final stat, if I may, because I'm supposed to bring the numbers. But there is an overwhelming sense by people polled recently that when we talk about diversity and inclusion of any kind, the important global conversation happening right now about diversity and inclusion, that faith should be a part of that. So 78% of people, 78% are saying, if I'm going to discuss diversity and inclusion in my hometown, in my club, in my country, in my corporation, I need to make sure that religious diversity is part of that and included in it. This thing, technology, was supposed to be or could be pluralism's platform. This should be a platform for pluralism when good information is checked, when storytelling is appropriate and authentic, and when you have algorithms that help people tell a story and express rather than just perpetuate. I think those are some of the themes that we talked about. So I think if we embrace it that way, and if we put religion, religious freedom, faith, God-centered spirituality inside the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, then we're going to be doing that work that is so important.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, I know in my work with journalists around the world that without the freedom of expression for them, that's really their vehicle to be able to allow other people to have their own religious freedom expressed as well and protected. So they work hand in hand, and the work of journalists is so critical to that. I've seen it in many countries. I know that there's an education gap with journalists. I've seen this firsthand. There's a lack of a sense of agency amongst many journalists. But I also know, working on the government side of it and founding the Religious Freedom Caucus in the Congress and hearing from so many advocates and people on the ground that came to me, that often the voice of the journalist, the voice of anybody speaking out in the media about the situation that's happening on the ground was that person's lifeline to know that there's hope, that they're not forgotten, and that there is a future. And so I would just thank both of you for the great work that you're doing to make sure that these voices are being heard, and thank all of you out there for making sure that those stories are getting to them. So thank you all today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.